Today we have Andrea Carter lead on WECAN. Andrea, thank you. You are a global neuroscience-based consultant focusing on workplace belonging and cultural transformation. You We basically lose billions of dollars every year in lost productivity, and you show how the science of belonging counters that. You're an organizational scientist, creator of the Belonging First methodology, TEDx speaker, Forbes Council member, and adjunct professor at Adler University. Andrea, talk to us about your work and the Belonging First methodology.
Oh, well, thank you for that incredible introduction, Stephanie. I really appreciate it. I think you nailed all of the, professional answer of who I am as an organizational scientist who studies belonging at work. The human answer, I think, is the one that your listeners will want to know a little bit more about because, for years I watched what happens to people when belonging is missing. And
Mm,
brilliant people go quiet, productive people burn out. People that should have stayed, they walk out the door.
mm,
And I kept thinking, why is nobody naming what's actually happening here? Can we name it? Can we actually look at that? And so I think what happened for me is I went on a search for language and for understanding. And that's what actually pulled me into the neuroscience and the organizational psychology. And my research has now reached over 150,000 people within 8 industries.
wow.
But it's been a process. So here's kind of overview of what I learned. Belonging is not just how people feel. Belonging is actually how people perform.
Mm,
And it can be measured, it can be built, and it predicts whether people stay, whether people can give their best, and whether people can actually perform to their greatest potential, or whether
mm,
they're going to keep hitting that ceiling. And I think what really tipped me over the edge, back in 2000, around the time of COVID, um, and that's really where I started a lot of the belonging research in the organization, was I had to get really honest about what it had cost me personally not to belong.
mm,
And I wanted to take a look at the part that nobody wants to look at. And that's really the giving and the receiving, because belonging is not a one-sided sport. It's 100% looking at what you are giving and what you are receiving.
mm,
And women don't often do either of those
mm.
in a way that allows the environment to show up for them, or where they are also showing up for the environment without giving everything they have.
Yeah, so true.
So, what I will say, just off the hop, anyone listening who wants to see if their belonging is breaking down and where it is, so that 50-50 kind of element of what you're giving and what you're receiving, there is a free tool that you can use at Belonging Breakdown. It's called Belonging Breakdown. And it's at belongingfirst.com/belonging breakdown. So I just want to put that out there so that your listeners can look at that either while we're going through this or while they're listening to this, but also really kind of understand when we get into the nitty-gritty of what
Mm.
belonging actually is, so that they can also look at, okay, where am I doing well? Where can I do better? And what are some of the language pieces that maybe I don't know about that can actually allow me to create that environment that I'm truly craving?
Andrea, I love listening to you, and I'm fascinated because I always think we do live in times where we have a divided society plagued by loneliness, right? And not belonging. So could you talk to us a little bit about what are those pieces of belonging? Um, to
Yeah,
to 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 explain a little bit, I mean, we talk about belonging and we sort of understand that instinctively because we
mhm.
belong to a tribe, we belong to a family. Hopefully, we know those pieces are really important. Connection and belonging is sort of the underpinning of a successful and happy life. Talk to us about your understanding.
Yeah, I love that. And I love how you introduced that too, Stephanie, because if you look at belonging, so one of the reasons why belonging became my area of
Mm,
focus was because about 11 years ago, we did a study on DEI to see whether DEI would actually polarize people or bring people closer together.
mm,
And the results actually showed that we would polarize based on our language and based on how we were actually going about bringing it together. And so what's happened is that the polarization that has occurred layered with COVID and kind of the isolation that people went through has
mm,
created this massive change in our society. So people are
mm,
lonelier than they've ever been. There is the least amount of trust within organizations, within our institutions, within our governments than we've ever had in history. And we have more ostracization um, and what's the word I'm looking for? Where we're kind of casting out people when they don't
canceling them.
fit.
No, it's,
Can't,
yeah,
thank you.
yeah.
It's cancel culture. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That was exactly the word. And so when we look at all of these pieces that go together, what I had to look at is like, what is belonging? And so your brain actually has five things that it needs. And I call them indicators. But each one does a specific thing for your
Mm,
brain and your body. So I'm going to list the indicators and then I'm going to tell you what that indicator actually does.
yeah.
So there's five: comfort, connection, contribution, psychological safety, and well-being. So comfort is your brain not having to scan for threat.
Mm,
And where that takes place is when you have clarity or predictability within your environment. And so what happens is that your stress chemistry actually drops so that your thinking brain, your prefrontal cortex, your executive functioning, your decision making can actually stay online.
mm,
Connection is about being known and not just being near people. People think of connection through proximity, and it's actually looking at how you're building trust processes rather than transactional processes. And that's the difference between carrying 100% of the responsibility, accountability, and cognitive load and sharing it. And so our brain is actually really cool because we have these things called mirror neurons. And when we trust each other, when we work well together, we actually will load bear in ways that don't require our brains to work as hard.
mm,
And if we don't have that trust piece, then we actually will always go through transactional actions. And that's where we end up either overgiving or opting out. Contribution is knowing and having evidence that what you're doing and who you are matters. So it's being able to see that your effort makes a difference and that there's actually a signal within your brain that says, oh, yeah, I know that Stephanie matters here. And there's evidence of that. And so what that does is it actually triggers your dopamine and your serotonin. And when
mm,
you have dopamine is our hit. It's our what gives us motivation. It's what when we feel friction or conflict or challenge, and we have a hit of dopamine, we go, okay, wait a second. I matter here. I think I matter here. I think what I can give here will help change something. And it's serotonin that actually has to kick in through the evidence that you see somebody actually saying, yes, Stephanie actually made this specific point, And that changed the trajectory of this decision. And that actually made an impact here.
Mm.
And if you can see that, and there is mattering involved, then your serotonin cycle, your serotonin dopamine cycle stays engaged, which means that you'll continue working and you'll continue with discretionary effort through times where it is extremely challenging and hard. But if you don't have that, if there's no evidence that you matter, that the work
Mm.
that you're doing matters, that's where the opt out comes in.
Definitely.
Psychological safety. So, psychological safety is being able to speak up, disagree, admit a mistake, push back, all of that without having any sort of social punishment for it. And your brain treats social rejection like physical pain. So
Mm.
nobody wants to stick their neck out in an environment where they are going to be penalized, because that we actually our brain interprets it interprets it as pain. And so what's fascinating about this is that physical pain will heal, it'll go away. Psychological pain, like what I just described, relives. It goes over and over and over in our brain.
Mm.
And so it becomes bigger than what people think it is. And that actually, when you don't have protection um, through psychological safety, it means that there are scars that continue to repeat over the series of work, teams, family, and those scars are carried forward because that social rejection is on autopilot. Well-being is, your ability to build recovery into whatever it is that you're working on or doing. And our society deals with resilience in a really weird way. We see this all the time. Okay, Stephanie, I'm going to give you an app. Here's some meditation. Go off on your own. You go figure out how to bounce back. We'll give you all the tools, but you go do it on your own. And when you're better, yeah, come on back, right? And that's actually, our brains don't work like that. We are social beings. If you look at any of the research or data on how quickly people recover from natural disasters when they are recovering together,
Mm.
in one to, you have to have more than one. So typically we're looking at 3 to 5 at least within your kind of like little circle. And when you are doing things together to recover, you recover 40 to 60% faster than if you're on your own. So let's think about that, because think about all the times you've been told to like go to your room. Remember when we were kids, we were told go to
Yes,
your room, and when you were
terrible.
better, Stephanie, you can come back down and rejoin us.
Time out. I remember that,
Time
and I
out.
remember the schools did it, and I also have neurodiverse children, and I remember thinking instinctively, this is the worst
Yeah.
because that message isn't landing. It
No.
just doesn't
Yeah,
work. The naughty corner or
absolutely.
the naughty step or those kind of things, yeah, they felt awful. Um,
Yeah, and all that they do is increase rejection sensitivity, which is
mm,
which is very similar to social rejection, but it trains the brain that you are bad. And so there are these kind of tapes that end up running. And so then once you have those tapes, your ability to go into environments that are fitting in environments, and we'll get to that. We'll talk about the difference between a fitting in environment and a belonging environment. But what it does is that people then have a very hard time ever trusting the environment. And so then the work has to be individual and
mm,
environmental. And those two pieces are where the gap, and belonging truly breaks.
yeah,
So two things that matter the most here. One is that belonging is a system. It's not just one feeling. It's not just one thing. You need all five of those.
yeah.
And one of my research participants really said it perfectly. One, and I'll never forget this, because we were doing behavioral elements for how do you shift environments that are toxic into environments that create belonging. And we were testing, right? Because we can now measure an environment, we can measure a team, we
Mm,
can measure a function, um, and we can even measure like how much a manager or a people leader is creating belonging for their team. And so in the early days, you know, I was trying to figure out if we have these indicators, do we always have to start at the beginning? Should we start with the worst score, the best score? Like, where do we start? And one of the participants said, but Andrea, like, when you remove any one of these, none of them work well. And I'll never forget her saying that because she was in this situation where she was literally the person who was driving belonging in the organization.
mm,
And her boss did not believe that belonging would increase performance because at
mm.
that time there was nothing that
Yeah.
tied it together. And she gave me the example of her boss who, um, had been working on comfort, had been working on connection. So before that, he, didn't know any of his employees, had no idea who they were, didn't care about clarity or predictability. So you never knew what you were going to get with him. And so he had worked on those things. He had worked on comfort. He worked on connection. He had worked on psychological safety and well-being. So, four of those things. Contribution was the one that he didn't ever work on. And often he was that person who would steal ideas from people
Mm,
and then attribute them as his own. And so what was happening was, she said, so, yeah, we have comfort, yeah, we have connection, yeah, we have psychological safety and well-being. And she said, he's really done a lot of work on that. But he steals my ideas all the time. And she said, that breaks it for me because it tells me that no matter what I do, no one is actually going to have the evidence that I'm a rock star here.
yeah, and the
And I'll
trust is
never,
out the window.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
And so she said, and I always looked at that. And then we looked at it from repeatable measures as well. So, across 8 industries. I started in the mining industry, which was in of itself really a tricky industry because it's still kind of the Wild West. But I wanted to then see if we could replicate it across more to ensure validity. And what's fascinating is that when one of those goes lopsided, belonging breaks. And when you look at how to build it in order, they kind of come online in order. So you feel a sense of, can I be, am I being greeted and known from the
Mm,
moment you walk into a space, right? So that's kind of like basic belonging. Um, then you have some clarity about what you can expect in the environment. Then you start to create some trust. And so having comfort, connection, and then contribution, real contribution, where there's evidence that you matter, and then safety, and then well-being, that actually creates a completely different environment so that people can speak up, they can contribute, and they have a foundation in which they can try things. And that's what makes it safe to try things. And so, in this culture of cancel culture, canceling people, that's something that unless we have those foundations,
mm.
people are no longer willing to opt in.
Yeah, I agree. Andrea, I love it. You are so generous with all of your knowledge. What, if somebody is listening and thinking we need an Andrea because, too many of those things aren't shipshape. Tell us a bit how it works. You work with companies. How does it work? What can companies do to up their belonging index?
Yeah. So the way that I work, so often what people do is they hire me to come in to speak so that people become aware
Mm,
of belonging and what it is first.
yeah.
And I'm going to go through two ways that we break belonging and the 50-50 of belonging as well in just a moment. But once I'm brought in to speak, often what happens then is that we do work with the executives and then also from an individual perspective. And what I find is that A lot of people look at belonging as, is the environment giving it to me? But we don't ever really think about, am I giving it to others?
Mm.
And belonging is actually built on that you need to give and receive. And so let's just go through the 50-50 really quickly. It's not always 50-50, but you'll understand in just a sec. So fitting in and belonging are opposites. So fitting in is where 100% of that individual um, has to conform or change in order to be accepted, and the
Mm.
room does nothing. Okay. Belonging is where it is a 50-50. You are co-creating every single environment you are in. So you were always giving and you were always receiving. And so in a belonging environment, you can show up and the room is going to make space and co-create with you.
Mm.
And the 50-50 is not just, okay, we're both going to try. This is where each side is giving something only they can give, and one side cannot cover for the other. Okay. A leader who walks into a room cannot calm your nervous system for you if you don't have tools to calm your own nervous system.
Yeah.
No amount of you giving to somebody can fix a room that withholds clarity and trust. Yeah. Both halves have to show up. And this is where I find, a lot of people tend to break it in kind of two opposite ways. And I had somebody recently say to me, well, isn't that like aren't you describing women only? And I'd like to be clear that this is not a
Mm.
gender-based
No.
uh, action or activity. Our brains have similar wiring in how we experience belonging. And so you'll notice some people are overgivers.
Mm.
We do more, we carry more, we give until we're empty because somewhere we learned that if we just do enough, we'll eventually learn our place. Others go quiet. They're like, you know what? You guys can take care of that. I will do what I can when I can, and only when it's needed. And so there's kind of these opposite elements, and they're really the same move. When your body feels unsafe, when your brain is not experiencing belonging, it will default. That's
Mm.
basic biology, over functioning or shutting down. And so both are fitting in. It's your nervous system managing a threat and not building belonging, which means that when you go into these environments and you think, oh, well, they're not showing up for me, you often will default to either overgiving or opting out. And
Mm.
that also means that you're not also providing belonging either.
Yeah.
So we have to acknowledge that we can overgive or undergive at any given time, depending on what our patterns are within our environments. And somebody, not myself, but somebody articulated this as like, you're either the saint or the sinner. And most people will cast themselves as the saint, right? Like, I'm the person who's doing this, or I'm the person who's doing that. And we often fail to see where we are maybe not giving or not receiving. And you can choose. Some people are great at being givers and terrible at being receivers, and vice versa. So, what's actually happening in the brain is that when you feel disconnected, your brain goes on alert for this rejection and it pays
Mm.
way more attention to the negative, and it expects the worst from people. And then it remembers all of the slights. And it's like you all of the sudden have a tally and you just continue to add them up. And eventually, what happens is that it's not just addition, it's multiplication. And your brain then starts filtering through it. And there's this thing researchers call the liking gap. And what happens is that we chronically underestimate how much people actually like us and want to connect with us.
Mm.
And so the story, they do not care, I'm the only one trying, is the very filter that actually prevents us from being able to create belonging environments, because we're not actually being honest with the indicators and what is showing up there for us. And the trap is this: if they are the sinner, your only two moves are resentment or martyrdom.
Mhm.
Both keep you stuck,
Yeah.
right? And that story, it could feel like truth, but really it's just taking people's power away. So the honest question, and that's why I gave your listeners that URL, so belongingfirst.com/belonging breakdown. That's kind of part of what allows you to start thinking about, where am I withholding? What am I not counting? Where am I keeping score so that I can feel safe? But that's actually creating a barrier between me and what I really want. And what I often see in the research is that when people score really low on connection, it's almost never that they don't want to connect. It's almost never that they don't want to create clarity and predictability. It's that they don't know how, or they don't even know that they're not being clear, or they're not creating predictability for other people.
Mm.
And it's not that they didn't try, it's that it necessarily didn't land. And so, if that's true for you, and it's true for everyone at some point, um, you're going to cast the other person as a sinner. And so when we look at regulating within a system, we have to build metrics not only for our individual contributors, but also for people leaders. And people leaders, that changes depending at what level you're at. We have a lot of people in the management kind of section who have never been given tools on how to create simple ways for people to lean in and
Yeah.
trust. And so that is, while we often measure a whole organization or we can measure a team, that's actually the place that I love starting,
Mm.
because when we look at managers or people leaders who have inherited a team, maybe they've just been promoted, or maybe they are new to an organization. Having these things actually allows people to perform better together and not continue to repeat the same toxicity or chronic conflict that had been there previously.
Andrea, so give us some numbers. How much productivity do we lose every day because simply we're not aware or we're not willing or we don't know how? And then I also think that aren't many companies just like, all of our social structures. There are just people who naturally are people who, are the people's people. They just want to belong. They make you feel like they belong. They make you feel important. They give you this trust relationship. And then there's just people that have absolutely no idea that they're not doing it.
Yeah. So, what I'll share for numbers perspective is there's so many numbers I could go to, but what we recently did in a manufacturing company was we measured a plant that we were working with belonging skills and competencies and behaviors in, and then we measured their other plant with we weren't doing any intervention in that plant. So there's two plants. The first plant, when we measured discretionary effort with the question after doing all the belonging work, would you show up in the event that your plant needed you, even though you weren't supposed to be here? And 87% of the people who worked in that plant said that they would.
Wow.
In the other plant, only 32% said that they would.
Hmm.
So discretionary effort is a huge indicator, because when we look at motivation, inspiration, what that says is it's not just an ESAT score. It's not just like, do I enjoy being here? You're right. If you
Yeah.
have discretionary efforts that you want to spend at work rather than at home with
Mm,
your children or your family or your friends or, doing something outside of work, that's a really big indicator to
yeah.
think about.
Yeah.
When we don't have belonging, though, similar to, telling somebody to go and recover on their own and then come back when they're better, um, you're looking at only 30% of your brain functioning at its available resources
Mm,
when you're in a fitting in environment. So when we don't have belonging, we're really only operating at about 30% on average. So we know from a performance perspective that when those five indicators are there, that means that people are actually doing functioning at their um, greatest potential. And it doesn't mean that you're always going to be operating at your greatest potential. What it means is that the people that you work with, remember those mirror neurons that we started our interview with, it means that all of you that you are working together with are bearing the load so that you're all sharing how much energy you give to that
mm,
vision that you are trying, vision goal, whatever it is that you're trying to attain. And so when that is happening with a belonging environment, it means that you're not going home as exhausted. It
yeah.
means that you actually have energy at the end of the day to show up for your kids or your, your partner or, the people that you love in your life. And that's a very different environment than going home completely exhausted because you've been protecting yourself the entire, 8 to 10 hours that you are in a work environment. Um,
So it
so
must have
when
huge repercussions on your health, right? Because that has huge repercussion on your overall well-being.
they say that fitting in environments where 100% of you to conform is required is like smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day. It's the
Wow.
same implications on your health.
Mm, mm. So not only do you lose billions in productivity, you also make your employees sick.
Well, and that's an interesting piece as well, because we have looked at, and again, not across the whole 150,000 employees, only in certain um, companies have they asked me to do this. And so
Mm,
we don't have the same aggregated data. But in the companies that asked me to also look at sick days in correlation to our belonging, when we first started, sick days were specifically at that. I'll use that manufacturing plant because they also were very interested in the amount of sick days that were being taken. And those sick days were reduced by over 42%.
wow.
Which, when you think about the cost and what that translates
Mm,
into, those aren't just thousands of dollars,
no.
depending on the size, right? That's millions of dollars. And
Yeah.
so I think those are elements that, when we look at those implications, whether that's sick days, whether that's PTO, whether that's also like RTO, return to work. How many people are returning to work and are actually going in and staying? I think the return to work policies, depending on what country you're in as well, because this is very um, much based on localized data. But what we've seen is that the return to work policies in how they're creating that belonging environment or a fitting in environment is also then driving how much well-being, sick days, personal
Mm,
time off
mm,
is being used, and obviously that discretionary effort where that's coming in as well.
yeah. Andrea, so talk to us about those pivotal points that got you to where you are today. When did this passion for
Mm.
this, beautiful subject, because it's it's everything we are about, I feel, as humans.
Yes, and let me start. So I would say that again, like the work that I have done started at my kitchen table when I watched my children not be able to regulate in specific environments.
Mm,
And while I was doing my master's back in 2001, we had moved. My children were going to a new school, and both my kids, as I mentioned, are neurodivergent. And my son was actually targeted by a series of families in our new environment that we moved into because they did not understand neurodiversity. They
mm,
didn't understand ADHD or autism. And at one point he was beaten. At one point he was suicidal. It was probably the hardest time in his life and 100% in mine. Um, when you watch your child go through that type of rejection,
mm,
ostracization, violence,
mm,
and then internalize it as I'm not enough,
mm.
where you're looking at how do I even make sense of this from that perspective, as well as he was also, our families didn't necessarily ever believe, some of them still don't believe that ADHD is real.
Yeah, yeah, I get
And
this all the time.
so, yeah, and so anybody who understands, the neurodivergent brain versus the neurotypical brain understands how that rejection converts. And so my passion came from watching him go through that and then listening to him, like really listening to him. And at the same time, I was also listening to, my social justice classes and people from all over the world talking about the rejection that they were experiencing through completely different identities and
Mm,
lenses. And all of this together, um, none of it looked the same, but the impact and the pain was being experienced on such a grand scale that I couldn't look away.
mm,
And I had to start looking at things through a different lens because my husband at one point said to me, we were talking about privilege at one point, and there was this ideation that privilege dictates, um, whether people create inclusion or belonging or whether they don't. And what's interesting about privilege is that your privilege changes depending on the environment that you're in. It changes on a day-to-day basis on, whether you're going out into your community or you're at the school or you're in a workplace, your level of privilege changes based on the people that you're around. And privilege is also seen through the lens of identity. So some people would say I had privilege because of the knowledge that I have,
mm.
um, rather than it being a monetary privilege
Yeah,
element. And some people would say, well, you have privilege because you have a neurotypical brain and you don't have a neurodivergent brain. And the reality is that all of these things are actually neutral, but it's how we position them in correlation to another person, which is why when we look at surveys and engagements and anything that produces metrics in an organization, when we look at a mean, when we look at the average score for something, it actually isn't telling you anything. It's telling you what your midline is, and it's telling you what your outliers are and what the
yeah.
people who actually don't ascribe to is. And unless you're actually looking at how these things are created, you're always going to have an element of exclusion or ostracization within that environment, especially when people don't understand that you are co-creating every single environment you enter.
Mm.
And so I think those pieces were really terribly important to my understanding. When I published my thesis in 2022, there was something else that was very significant that happened to me. My daughter, who is neurodivergent, she's dyslexic. She does have an IEP and has the IEP saying that she's ADHD. Her ADHD presents very differently than my son's.
Yeah.
Girls have a really wonderful way that they can mask because
Yeah.
they watch so much around them
Mm.
that they can actually code switch or be a chameleon is another way of thinking about that, and the energy that that requires to do that. And what was fascinating was that she was playing high-level volleyball, and she was recruited to go to Team Ontario for her first year. And when she went, she was surrounded by an environment of mean girls. And she
Mm.
actually didn't know what to do. Now she was the tallest. She's always been very tall. I'm a very tall woman. My husband is 6'10". So my daughter, by the time she was, 13, was already 6 feet. And my son is 6'9". So she went into this environment and all of the sudden became a target. And she didn't know what to do. And the coaches didn't actually do anything to intervene.
Mm.
And she actually got to a point where she scratched her legs so badly that blood was running down her legs and nobody did anything.
Mm.
And that also really changed the way that I'm seeing that internalization of rejection, that internalization of what it means to show up. And going back to what my husband was saying about if we're always looking for an environment to create belonging for us first, we'll actually never do it. And when I saw that with my daughter, who has already seen all of the things that happened with her older brother, and then watching her go through that, I thought, wow, we have to look at this differently because our kids are going into environments expecting that those environments are going to be safe.
Mm.
And when they're not, they don't actually have the tools to support the change or support the language that will actually allow somebody to realize this actually isn't a safe environment.
Yeah.
And so that language is also something that became very important to me. The language in my research is not my language. It wouldn't have been the language necessarily that I would have chose. But it's the language that was chosen by over, 150,000 participants now in 8 different industries. And what I find fascinating is that it's simple language that lands, that each person can understand. And so when you're in environments and you ask yourself, am I comfortable here? You can ask yourself, do I feel trust or connection here? Do I matter? Is my contribution, me being here, important? Is there evidence of that? Is it safe for me to speak up without being socially punished? And can I recover? And those 5 questions are very easy for us to ask ourselves. But then they're also easy to say, am I doing that for somebody else?
Mm. Andrea, I love that you gave us a clear roadmap for belonging and well-being for families, for schools, for universities, for workplaces, because these 5 points that you talked about earlier is really the roadmap for getting this done. And so it's not that complicated. Everybody can adopt it, which is, I love that. It's not rocket science. I mean, you scientifically proved these points, and so now everybody can just implement it. It's not that easy, is it? That's why people need you to come and help them do it. But what would you say to young people? What do you feel are the main points to find those places of belonging? Because on the top of my head, I can identify many places that are the fitting in type.
I believe that we actually, because of the cycles of socialization and how we've been taught to operate, and if you look at any of the Commonwealth, uh, countries, we have an ascription to perform in a certain way.
Mm,
And what I will say is this, is that one of your biggest assets always is to learn tools to help you self-regulate first.
mm,
And that means discovering your language for yourself through comfort, connection, contribution, psychological safety, and well-being. How are you giving that to you first?
yeah.
Because if you're not creating that for you first, it is very hard to go into an environment and try and give to another or even receive from another.
Mm,
And when we look at, family, partnership, friendship, so family, this is where we learn fitting in, isn't it? Right? And so when we learn in family that the nervous systems tune with each other, so the child who keeps the peace learns to overfunction early. It doesn't mean they're a good child. It means that that environment has never allowed them to be dysregulated or
mm,
be who they are. And as an adult, if you are a peacekeeper when you are a child, you are often burnt out as an adult. So in the family model, belonging has to be a place where you learn how to self-regulate so that you understand what you were co-creating when you were there with your family, but they also need to learn how to self-regulate too.
yeah.
And sometimes you're the regulator and sometimes you're the dysregulated, and you have to allow for that family member to show up. And I would say, people always look at our family and say, oh my goodness, it's not, we fight, we get loud, we're loud people, we're big people. But one of the things that we do very well for each other is we can support each other when we need it. And so
Mm,
that there's one person who can be that regulator and shift the perspectives. The same is true in partners, right? Where somebody is the saint or the sinner, and one of them will be loudest. And so, the saint often carries more of that mental load, the part that nobody names. When work drains you, you carry that home, and your partner, your kids, they pay the costs that you were never compensated for at work.
mm,
And so in those partnerships, you have to learn how to use language. And that's where those 5 indicators and the questions are so great, because it asks you, are you aware of where you're not regulated and
yeah.
how you're showing up for somebody else? And those questions, I think, are really important because it's very easy for us to slip into our patterns rather than recognizing the
Mm,
give and take. Friendship, that's another place. It's a very clear mirror because it's chosen. And so overgivers burn out, right? And resent it. And then the undergivers who don't do anything, they're like, well, what happened? Everything was fine until you chose not to show up anymore, right? And so this is where that liking gap shows up here as well. And so when there's a pullback, often that is unwanted, that's this personalization that happens. And often there's a pullback without any language to explain how I actually need you to show up for me too. Or, you know, can you do this? We often assume that the other person sees where we're coming from, and yet without having conversations, which aren't happening anymore because people are like, oh, Well, social media told me that if you're not this, you're toxic and
Mm,
I should just cut you out. And so we're seeing this happen all over the place.
yeah.
And, colleagues, it's the same, the glue work, the office housework, if you will, over functioning to fit in, the invisible labor that holds everything together, or the people that just never show up, but get the promotion. We hear that story all the time.
Mm,
And so these are all story banks, right? They're just all storylines that we play over and over in our consciousness mind, and it prevents us from looking at, what am I giving? What am I receiving? I'm in this environment now. What am I giving? What am I receiving? What can I give? What do I need to receive? And that's a language that we need to start learning
yeah.
so that we can actually show up for each other.
Yeah.
Because your language and my language, when we're actually speaking about the same thing, you can tell me in a way that I'll understand Stephanie needs this right now. And it doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It means that this is where she's at. This is what she's able to give. This is what I'm receiving. And it eliminates that saint-sinner dynamic.
Yeah. Andrea, what is most important to you as an adjunct professor?
Oh, curiosity, exploration, challenging. I love it when people challenge me, because it makes me think about um, where we give and receive more.
Mm,
And so I love where research is laid, and then people take it and they get curious and they go in all sorts of different directions. I think that is what allows us to grow and evolve. And that's the whole point, is for humans to continue to grow and evolve and get better. And
together.
together,
Okay.
that's right.
So, if somebody young is listening, what career path could there be to be someone like you?
Well, I did my degree in psychology and then went into neuroscience and then went into industrial and organizational psychology.
Mhm.
So, two masters. What I will say is today is different than it was in my day. I'm, not a dinosaur, but I'm older, and the way that research was done even 5 years ago has changed with our AI.
Yeah,
The first thing I want to say is, don't believe AI. And we know that garbage in is garbage out. And so if you don't know anything about a subject, do not rely on AI to teach you, but you can certainly use it to search where you should explore, and it will help you navigate. Um, what I will say is, learn things that interest you.
mm,
Um, don't be afraid to make mistakes. And when you've made a mistake or a perceived mistake, look at it as learning. So I do not believe today, and the reason I say that is I do not believe today that there is any career choice that you can make that's wrong. I believe that what AI will do for us is it will help us clarify what our skills, what our natural inclinations are that we're good at. It'll make it easier for us to figure that out. And all of the old ways that we've done things, we have tons of applications now as professors, where we can, scan a paper and see
mm.
whether, how much was actually written by the student and how much was written by AI.
Claude.
And
Mm,
right, cloud is amazing, and students now have to score under 20%, otherwise it's an instant fail.
mm,
And I think that that's good, because I do think that we need elements in place. Um, Use AI to help guide you, but really navigate your own thought, your own curiosity. Get gritty on things that confuse you. Get gritty on things that excite you. And don't be scared to play with that, but don't take something as verbatim. Internalize it, play with it, get, as I said, gritty with it. Um, because that helps you develop and grow. And what we're showing now is that the people who are just using AI to populate information, there's a direct correlation with your brain going offline
Mm,
and those pathways that you need to learn and grow so that your brain is intellectually working on many functions deteriorates if you're only using AI. Like it's fascinating. I could go on for hours about this one subject.
yeah,
So get gritty,
yeah,
dig in.
yeah. So, what does success look like for you?
Such a great question. Success for me is if I can continue learning and growing long into my older age. And what that means for me is um, being able to travel and teach and share the information well into my, 70s, potentially 80s. That is success for me.
Yeah.
Success is watching my children who, have experienced all of this adversity turn into incredible leaders, kind human beings that create environments that allow their teammates and their peers and their friends to also succeed. Um, Success is watching our family grow as a unit and continue to, I love my husband. I've been with him for 30 years and he's also neurodivergent. Yeah, high five. And, everyone talks about this love story that we have, but we just create belonging for each other. And if that marriage stays as successful as it has been, that is also success for me. Being in love and so in love still at my age when we met when I was 18, that's amazing.
Amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing. Andrea, what are your plans and goals? What is in the pipeline?
Oh, well, I'm working on two books right now, which I'm super excited about.
I'm
I
excited about that. Very excited. Get them
well,
done.
I know. Well, actually, what happened was that I had one book that I was ready to release, and my editor said to me, Andrea, I actually think that this is two books. And I had already submitted everything, and she said, I really think that you're doing a disservice if you just release this now. And I was so disappointed. Stephanie, I was
Mm,
so disappointed because I loved what I worked so hard on my writing. I write every day. And I had worked so hard on this. And when I heard her say it, I was like, I internalized it first as, oh, I'm a failure. But really what she was saying was, look at this from this is what we are craving.
mm,
Explain that, put that in story and context,
yeah.
and then produce the book where it's like, how do people build it? And so we're in the process of just kind of separating those two um, and creating the content that allows people to read the book, go to the book, go to the back end learning place and then do work from it. And that's a totally different feel than just a release,
It sounds
if
like
you
it's going to
will.
be a book and a workbook, and we need that because in order for us to
Yes.
have successful lives, we need to create belonging, no matter in which environment, whether that's in for yourself, for your family, for your friends, for your company, for the company you work at, any venture, any innovation, any university place. It's the key to well-being and success. So, if what takeaways would you like our listeners to have from your story
Hmm.
if you had to sum it up in just a few sentences?
Yeah. So I think the most important piece that I will leave your listeners with, this one thing, this is it. You're not here to give 100%, and you're not here to give nothing. You're here to give your honest 50, your honest um, energy. And you're also here to let others give you theirs.
Mm,
So receiving is half the work. And a lot of us are good at one and not good at another. And if you're exhausted, please hear me. Many people talk to me about how exhausted they are.
mm,
That exhaustion is just proof that um, you have been carrying both halves for a very long time. And if you want to see where your belonging is strong and where it's breaking, go take that belonging breakdown. So belongingfirst.com/, well, belonging breakdown, all one word. And I often am on Substack. So join me on Belonging First, Rethink Culture. And Stephanie, I just want to say thank you. This was exactly the honest kind of conversation that really builds what we're talking about. And so thank you for providing me with as much belonging today as I hope that I've given you.
Andrea, you are amazing. I'm so excited to have you on WeCan. Thank you for leading so beautifully and so powerfully with all this incredible knowledge that we need, especially in the times we live in. And you heard it, people, how to figure out how to get in touch with Andrea, how to use her tools. And thank you for your incredible generosity in sharing today.